Welcome to the 16th session of Within the Shadow of the Galilean. Hey, Becky, are you okay? You don't look real good. Becky? Becky, what? What you do? No, Becky! Becky, no! I had so much fun doing that. Welcome to the apocalypse. During this session, we'll ask the question, was Jesus the apocalyptic prophet that foretold of the end time or not? We're going to begin by looking at apocalyptic words and phrases we find in the Gospels. Then we're going to look at apocalyptic books and what it takes for a book to be within the literature of apocalyptic literature. And then we're going to look at what are called apocalyptic discourse and ask the question, are there apocalyptic discourses within the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke? And then we will look at the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13. But first, a brief commercial about my favorite apocalypse, zombie apocalypse. No, not really. I just want to share briefly the core resources I used for this session. The first is a book entitled The Apocalyptic Imagination, third edition that came out in 2016. And the second one is Apocalyptic Literature in the New Testament that also came out in 2016. These two books offer us a new understanding of apocalypse, apocalyptic literature, and apocalyptic movements that really overturn the traditional understanding that apocalyptic literature was dried up prophetic literature from the prophetic books of the Hebrew Bible. Another popular tradition was that apocalypse was a remake of the wisdom tradition in the Hebrew faith. The new understanding is apocalyptic literature, apocalyptic movements, apocalyptic discussions or discourses stand as their own type of literature and movement and discourses. So let's do a countdown of the top 5 apocalyptic words that we love. Number 5 is demon or demons. Before the book of Daniel, there were no cosmic beings who were opposed to God's will. After the book of Daniel, we get an army full of demons opposed to God's rule. Word number 4. Every army of demons needs a leader, so then we have Satan or the devil. Before the book of Daniel, Satan is a member of God's divine court, heavenly court. After the book of Daniel, the devil or Satan becomes God's primary opponent. Word number 3 comes from the book of Daniel, one of our favorite words, the Son of Man, which appears in the Gospels, and really in 3 different ways that we've talked about earlier, but we will focus on one of those ways, one like a Son of Man that comes from the book of Daniel, that's used in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Here's another one of our favorite apocalyptic words. Number 2, Christ, more specifically, the Christ. Before the book of Daniel, we find in Hebrew scriptures the word Christ used in a very general way. In apocalyptic literature, after the book of Daniel, it identifies a single person as the Christ. And then our number 1 top favorite apocalyptic word, resurrection. Before the book of Daniel, there is no mention in the Hebrew scriptures of resurrection. By the time we get to the Jewish Jesus movement after Jesus' death, resurrection becomes central. I mentioned the book of Daniel with each of our 5 favorite apocalyptic words, because there was no such thing as apocalyptic literature before the book of Daniel. And Daniel was written 164 years before the birth of Christ, approximately 164 years before the Common Era. And before that literature, there was no such thing as apocalyptic. So there's no apocalyptic discourses in any of the prophetic books. If you were to go on Wikipedia and you would look at the page for apocalyptic, you would find that they list some apocalyptic discourses in the midst of the Hebrew prophets. Most modern day scholars do not believe that that is apocalyptic discourse. It is prophetic discourse. A piece of literature needs to have these 4 characteristics to be considered apocalyptic. It must begin with a vision, have visions all the way through, and end with a vision. Apocalyptic literature is always one vision after another vision after another vision. And apocalyptic literature does not take place so much on earth and in history as it takes place as a cosmic, eternal struggle. Apocalyptic literature also has bizarre cosmic symbols. The 4th characteristic is apocalyptic literature has a final judgment that vindicates the righteous. In order to be apocalyptic literature, it has to have all four of those characteristics. So in the 66 books in our sacred story, we have one book that is apocalyptic and half of a second book that is apocalyptic. Half of Daniel's apocalyptic, and there is the apocalypse of Jesus Christ, or the revelation of Jesus Christ that we know as the book of Revelation. So none of our Gospels are apocalyptic, but there is one apocalyptic discourse. The earliest one finds its place in Mark chapter 13. Apocalyptic discourse is an extended piece of writing that uses the terms and themes of apocalyptic literature, but it does not appear in an apocalyptic book. It appears in a book whose structure is not apocalyptic, like the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The vast majority of modern biblical scholars put Mark written right around the time that the Romans actually came in and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple and literally burnt it to the ground and toppled all the stones about 70 years into the Common Era, or 70 years after the birth of Christ. So the context for this writing may be as the temple has been or is being destroyed. When I read Mark chapter 13, I like to imagine myself sitting on a ledge overlooking Jerusalem as the Roman armies have finally captured Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. And the city is burning and it's being destroyed. People are taking off into captivity. Many people have died. It seems like it could be the end of the world. This is a context, I think, where we can best understand Mark 13. So far during this session, we've looked at apocalyptic terms. We've looked at apocalyptic themes. We've looked at the structure of apocalyptic literature. We've done a brief overview of Mark and the context of Mark 13, which within the whole gospel. I'm thinking this is going to be a good place to stop. And this is going to end up being a two-parter. And we will deal with Mark 13 specifically during our next session. So until we're able to gather for our next session, watch out for that zombie apocalypse.